Hi, I'm Simon Black. I'm the CEO of PPRO. We process e-commerce payments for the leading payments companies around the world, and we really focus on local and alternative payment methods, so the particular ways people like to pay in different countries around the world. I'm really excited to present to you some of the major changes we're seeing, a real shift in e-commerce, which has happened this year, accelerated by the pandemic. So over the next 15 minutes, I'll take you into some of the trends that we're seeing and the changes in consumer behavior, the different ways that people are going about their shopping, what they're buying, which has also changed, and critically how they're paying, which is part really of a revolution, moving from cash and traditional non-cash payment methods to digital payment methods of a growing variety, including wallets and all kinds of bank-based payments, which are developing at a faster pace than before the pandemic started. What you will all know, of course, is that there's been a major shock to the economy wherever you're living around the world. And GDP, gross domestic product, the output of economies, is forecast to reduce significantly, anything up to 4 or 5%. And over a shorter periods of time, we've seen drops as high as 20%. There's been a similar dramatic shift in people shopping online versus in-store. In-store payments have gone down by 26% year on year. Again, in some sectors, some markets, even at much higher rates than that. Online has benefited from a big shift in consumer behavior. So we'll look at which industries are growing, which industries have decreased, how have ticket sizes changed? So ticket sizes is the value of a transaction, how much have we spent in an individual transaction, and where consumers are shifting their shopping towards around the world. So e-commerce was growing anyway, but there's been a major acceleration. And we look at some markets in particular. In the US at the beginning of April, in the early days of the shelter in place or the lockdown, we saw more than 50% increase in online orders. And while that has tailed off, there's still a very significant growth ahead of what was expected. We've seen big changes in behavior. So in Europe, when we looked at Germany, UK, and France, we've seen now 80% of consumers are making more than half their purchases online. And in China, there's been a staggering quadrupling of shopping of common household goods online in the peak. So where you see the strictest lockdowns, this is where there were the biggest changes in behavior. And no market is exempt. What we've done is focused on with our looking to our data at some markets in particular to give you a flavor of the kind of changes that have been happening, and we'll drill down. I think a significant thing to be aware of is that the growth in e-commerce was expected over the next 3 years has happened in 2020. So when we say a great shift, we're not exaggerating. There's been a massive shift. And what we'll also consider later in the presentation is which habits are really going to take root, right, to become more permanent. If we drill down into what people are buying, where has there been a significant increase? And maybe you can identify with some of this. Huge jumps in food and beverage. So there are many consumers who had not ordered groceries online before and that were really forced to, because of the pandemic, forced to try that for the first time. And we know from anecdotal evidence, many people were surprised how easy it was, how reliable, and have no intention to go back to doing the big weekly shop in a giant supermarket. So almost a 300% increase there. This is from the PPRO data. So this is transactions going through our platform. Women's clothing, another big increase, 311%. So we think that's driven by two factors. One is we need ways to cheer ourselves up. But also what we've been wearing, staying at home the whole time, has changed, right? So maybe more sweatpants, more t-shirts for the extended summer. And then you can see other categories which have also grown significantly. A big one was online gaming. Again, people having to change their behavior, right? So entertainment and pastimes that were previously out of the home had to come back into the home. I think the big increase in video gaming, maybe that turns out to be temporary, but other activities such as doing an online exercise class, these things will become permanent for many people. Again, both participants but also fitness instructors, many didn't realize how easy it would be and what the benefits could be of online classes versus having to travel to a gym and deal with everything. Some sectors are growing less, but still very significant, such as charitable giving or online media. Those that went down, no surprise, travel saw the biggest drop. So there are various forecasts as to how long this will take to come back. And obviously the reduction in travel in some cases has had a direct inverse effect in other areas such as web conferencing. And we're all familiar, for example, with the astronomic growth in Zoom, but also huge growth in other platforms such as Microsoft Teams and Google Hangouts. Activities, where, as I said, mentioned earlier, sport activities, also a significant drop. And we're buying less shoes. I guess we're walking less. So what's interesting is to try to predict what happens in those sectors. Really depends how long these restrictions go on, but clearly it will be a long time before travel does get back to where it was, if it does at all. In terms of the amount people are spending, again, we saw quite big changes. And I think this was largely driven, so our data here is comparing January to June. And in June, there was still a lot of one-off purchases happening. So people at home buying new home gym equipment, for example, maybe new home office equipment, a desk, a chair, a monitor. So the average spend or average ticket size was going up significantly. I don't think we'll sustain this level of increase. I think the total spend, the growth there will continue. But I think the average value of each item will come back down to a significant degree. But I think what's useful with this is to really get you to help to think about the really massive impact, the big changes that were enforced on us as consumers, but that proactive merchants, proactive sellers have been there, able to meet the consumer need and take advantage of the opportunity. I think more significant is the way people are paying. And it's very important to have an international perspective here. So on the left, we've just highlighted a handful of countries, but in most countries of the world, there is a significant change going on in how people are actually paying. So we've talked about where they're shopping, shifting from in-store to online. But for online, there's also a shift from how people are paying, with an increased emphasis on local payment methods to particular markets. So if we look at Mexico, for example, their domestic cards, which may be branded Visa, MasterCard, actually work quite differently, which can be a challenge, for example, for US-based sellers or US-based merchants. Also, local payment methods such as OXXO are really critical in that market. So OXXO enables people to order online, but then they get a voucher, they go to an OXXO store. OXXO is like the 7-Eleven of Mexico, and they hand over cash, and at that point, the transaction is completed. So understanding the consumer's preferred way to pay is critical for sellers, because what a seller wants to do is maximize conversion. And if a consumer, for example, wants to pay with OXXO, maybe they don't have a card or a bank account, so they need to be able to hand over cash in a store to complete the transaction. Well, if a particular seller is not offering OXXO as a payment method, maybe that consumer is going to go elsewhere. And our research has shown us that typically more than 50% of consumers will leave something in their basket, will choose an alternative provider if they can't pay with their preferred payment method. Where we've seen most growth, for example, is with Ideal in the Netherlands. are more than doubling there, 214% growth. Ideal is a form of ACH or bank transfer payment method. So in the Netherlands, the banks created this scheme Ideal, which makes it really easy for consumers to just click, enter in a password, and pay for their online shopping direct from their bank account. Hugely popular, and one of the big corridors where we've seen that growth, where that 240% figure comes from, is the Irish merchants selling into the Netherlands, and they've seen a huge benefit when they've offered Ideal as a payment method. Another example is German sellers into Belgium with Bank Contact. Bank Contact is the national debit scheme for Belgium. Another example, French sellers into Germany. We're seeing a high growth with Klarna in Germany, which is a pay later payment method. So buy now, pay later. Worldwide is a growth trend, whether in the US right through to Australia. This is proving more and more popular with consumers. Klarna's core product enables consumers simply to split the payment into 3 over the next 3 months, and it's interest-free for the consumer. So it's a good example of the proliferation of different ways to pay, which are becoming available. And once consumers become aware of it, they are driving demand. And in turn, the merchant or the retailer is seeing that, recognizing I can increase my overall revenue if I accept these payment methods, and they in turn put pressure on the payment service providers. And what we've seen since the beginning of the year, and certainly since mid-March, when most countries first went into some kind of lockdown or confinement, we've seen an acceleration of these trends. I think the last one, which is a big growth market for e-commerce in Europe, is Poland, actually becoming quite a significant economy. And for Dutch sellers selling into that the Polish market, we saw an almost 200% increase in growth of some of the key local payment methods there, including Blik, which is a mobile-based payment method, a mobile wallet payment method. So what you have is an increasing amount of complexity around payments, which is required to be addressed if the retailer is to maximize their opportunity with the consumer. Different payment methods have different levels of popularity or suitability for different vertical industries. So it's quite important for retailers or merchants to have a strategy around which payment methods to offer. And in turn, we work with the retailers' payment service providers to ensure we're channeling our expertise to them to make sure they've got the right product set when it comes to local payment methods to offer to their merchant, so that we can ensure everyone is successful through the chain. So the payment service provider can maximize their opportunity, the merchant can maximize their opportunity, and what the consumer gets is choice, convenience, and a seamless experience. I think just to highlight a couple, Alipay and WeChat Pay are Chinese payment methods, which are used increasingly around the world by Chinese nationals for their shopping, both online and outside of the pandemic, also in store. Particularly popular for core retail, but also digital goods. A scheme that's growing rapidly beyond Sweden, where it started, across Europe, but also now in the US. Is Trustly, very popular in the financial services categories, such as foreign exchange. And as I said, Ideal, which has 60% market share in the Netherlands. So 60% of online transactions are paid for through Ideal. So naturally covering all of core retail, as well as financial services and different forms of gaming. Just to finish up, we know this is here to stay. From our research, 74% of UK consumers say they will prefer to shop online after restrictions are lifted. 40% of Americans saying are shopping more online than in store indefinitely now. This information and more is available in our latest white paper, which you can click the link to download, or you can go to ppro.com. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for your time, and please get in touch if you have any questions.